She loved him most in the moments he didn't notice her watching. It was a Tuesday night in October when he first said it. They were making dinner together, pasta, something easy, the kind of meal they'd made 100 times before. Steam rose from the pot between them. He was draining the water over the sink, she was chopping basil at the counter, and he turned to ask her something about garlic, and the word just slipped out. "Can you hand me that, princess?" She looked up. He was already reaching for the bowl, not meeting her eyes. "What did you just call me?" He laughed, embarrassed, shook his head. "Did I say that? Sorry, wasn't thinking." She smiled. It felt warm, unexpected, like finding money in an old coat pocket. "I kind of liked it." "Yeah?" He glanced at her then, something soft in his expression. "Yeah." They ate dinner with the television on. He fell asleep on the couch with his head against her shoulder. She stayed awake longer than she meant to, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, feeling the weight of him against her side. That night felt like proof. Proof that they were still good, still easy, still them. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears. One small truth at a time. Their life together had the texture of routine, the comfortable weight of years layered carefully one atop another. They'd lived in the same apartment for 4 years, a second-floor walk-up with hardwood floors that creaked near the bathroom and windows that looked out onto a street lined with maples. In autumn, the leaves turned red and gold and gathered in drifts along the curb. She liked to watch them from the kitchen window while she made coffee in the mornings. He worked in finance, something she never fully understood, despite his attempts to explain it. She was a teacher, 3rd grade, the year when children still believed in magic, but were starting to question it. They'd met at a wedding 7 years ago, danced badly to a song neither of them remembered, and built something careful and deliberate in the time since. There had been talk of marriage, of children, of buying a house somewhere with a yard. The talk always felt hypothetical, like planning a trip they'd take someday but never quite booking. Most evenings followed the same gentle pattern. He came home around 7. She was usually already there, grading papers at the dining table or reading on the couch. They'd decide on dinner, take out more often than cooking lately, and eat while catching up on a series they were watching together. Afterwards, he'd do the dishes while she prepared lessons for the next day. Sometimes they'd go to bed at the same time. More often, he'd stay up late working on his laptop, the blue light from the screen casting shadows across his face, and she'd fall asleep alone, waking briefly when he finally slid in beside her hours later, smelling of coffee and fatigue. It was a good life. She believed that. She told herself that on the mornings when she woke, to an empty bed, on the evenings when conversation felt like something they were both too tired to attempt. She told herself that love didn't have to be loud to be real. There were small things, of course. There were always small things. He'd started going to the gym more, 4, sometimes 5 times a week. He was on his phone constantly, but everyone was, weren't they? He laughed at things she couldn't see, his thumb moving rapidly across the screen. When she asked what was funny, he'd look up as if surprised to find her there. "Nothing," he'd say. "Just work stuff." She'd noticed he'd bought new clothes. Not many, just a few items that appeared in the closet without announcement. A navy button-down she'd never seen him wear to the office. A pair of dark jeans that fit differently than his others. When she complimented the shirt one Saturday morning, he said he'd had it for ages, she just hadn't noticed. She nodded, though she was certain she would have remembered it. These details existed like dust motes in sunlight, visible only at certain angles, easily dismissed. After he called her princess that night in October, something shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but she found herself listening differently to the way he spoke, cataloging small changes in his vocabulary, in his tone. He started saying, "I love you" more often, and each time it felt both reassuring and strange, like a word repeated until it loses meaning. She caught herself watching him in moments of distraction, when he was scrolling through his phone, when he thought she was asleep, when he stood at the window in the morning staring out at nothing in particular. His face in these moments looked different than the face he showed her directly, more distant, more complicated. "Are you okay?" she asked one night in November. They were in bed, the room dark except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains. "Yeah, of course. Why? You seem distracted lately." He rolled toward her, found her hand under the covers. "Just work. It's busy right now. I'm sorry if I've been distant." "You don't have to apologize." "I know, but I am sorry." He kissed her forehead. "I love you." I love you too. She lay awake after he fell asleep, listening to the sound of cars passing on the street below, trying to identify the feeling that had taken up residence in her chest. It wasn't suspicion, not exactly. It was more like the awareness that something had changed, but she couldn't locate where the change had occurred. Like walking into a familiar room and sensing that someone had moved the furniture an inch to the left. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt quite right. The word princess had disappeared from his vocabulary as quickly as it had arrived. December brought early darkness and cold that settled into the bones of the apartment. She started coming home to an empty space more often. He was working late, he said. Big project, tight deadline, endless meetings. She'd heat up leftovers for one and eat them standing at the counter. The silence in the apartment feeling less like solitude and more like absence. On a Thursday evening, 2 weeks before Christmas, she found his phone on the bathroom counter. He was in the shower. She could hear the water running, hear him humming something off key. The phone screen lit up with a notification. She didn't mean to look. That's what she told herself later. She was just glancing, just noticing. But the message was right there, visible for the 3 seconds before the screen went dark again. Missing you already? Good night, princess. The words hung in the air like smoke. She stood perfectly still, the phone in her hand now, though she didn't remember picking it up. Her heartbeat filled her ears. The water was still running. He was still humming. The world was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago, except everything was different. She set the phone back on the counter exactly where it had been. She walked out of the bathroom. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking, but she folded them in her lap and made them still. When he came out, towel wrapped around his waist, hair wet and dark, she looked up at him and smiled. "What should we do for dinner?" she asked. Her voice sounded normal. She was impressed by that. "I was thinking we could just order pizza," he said, pulling on sweatpants. He was looking at his phone now, the one she'd just set down, his thumb moving across the screen. His face revealed nothing. "Pizza sounds good." They ordered pizza, they ate it, they watched television. He laughed at something on the show, and she laughed too, a beat later, not because anything was funny, but because that's what you do when the person next to you laughs. You join in, you pretend. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay beside him in the dark, listening to his breathing, slow and deepen, and replayed the message over and over in her mind. "Missing you already? Good night, princess." She tested different explanations, trying to find one that would make sense. A joke with a coworker, a message meant for someone else entirely, sent to him by mistake, an old friend using a nickname she didn't know about. None of the explanations felt true. The word princess had become something else now. It was no longer sweet or accidental. It was evidence. It was a name that belonged to someone who wasn't her. The days that followed had a strange quality, like living inside a photograph that was slightly out of focus. She moved through them normally, taught her class, graded papers, made grocery lists, smiled at appropriate moments. But underneath everything was the awareness that she was performing, playing the role of someone who didn't know. She started noticing things she'd previously dismissed, the way he tilted his phone away from her when typing, the new cologne that appeared on the bathroom counter, woodsy, expensive, nothing like what he usually wore, the frequency with which he volunteered to run errands alone, the Tuesday and Thursday evening gym sessions that had become sacred, untouchable parts of his schedule. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she watched. She listened. She became a detective in her own life, looking for clues that would either confirm or deny what she already knew. One evening while he was in the shower, always that vulnerable moment when his phone sat unattended, she picked it up again. Her hands were steadier this time. She knew his passcode. He'd never hidden it from her. She opened his messages. The contact was saved under a man's name, David from work. But the messages were not from David. Or maybe David didn't exist at all. The conversation thread was long, stretching back months. She scrolled, reading sentences that felt like glass cutting into her palms. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? You make me feel like myself again. I know this is complicated, but I don't want to stop. Good night, princess." There were hundreds of messages. They spoke in shorthand, in references she didn't understand, in an intimacy that had the texture of routine. They had inside jokes, they had plans, they had a language that belonged only to them. She closed the messages, deleted the evidence of having opened them, put the phone back exactly where it had been, walked out of the bedroom, sat on the couch, stared at the wall. When he emerged, dressed and smiling, asking what she wanted for dinner, she heard herself say, "Whatever you want is fine." He kissed the top of her head. "You're the best." She nodded. She agreed. She played along. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending everything is fine. It lives in the muscles of your face, in the effort required to smile on command, in the constant vigilance of monitoring your own reactions. She found herself forgetting simple things: where she'd put her keys, what day parent-teacher conferences were scheduled, whether she'd eaten lunch. Her students noticed. "Are you okay, Miss Roberts?" a little girl named Emma asked one afternoon. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just tired." My mom says that when she's sad but doesn't want to talk about it. Children, she thought, see everything. At home, she and he continued the dance of normalcy. They talked about surface things, what to watch, what to eat, whether they needed milk from the store. They didn't talk about why he came home smelling different sometimes, or why he smiled at his phone more than he smiled at her, or why he'd started saying, "I love you," with the frequency of someone trying to convince himself it was true. She wanted to ask. The question lived in her throat constantly, pressing against her teeth, demanding to be spoken. But asking meant breaking the fragile peace they'd constructed. Asking meant forcing them both to acknowledge what they were desperately pretending didn't exist. So she didn't ask. She watched. She waited. She wondered if this was what courage looked like, or if it was just cowardice dressed in patience. January arrived, brutal and gray. The new year felt like a joke. Fresh start, clean slate. All the lies people tell themselves when the calendar changes, but nothing else does. One evening, a Wednesday, ordinary in every way, he came home with flowers, tulips, pink and white, wrapped in brown paper. He handed them to her with a smile that looked almost genuine. "What are these for?" "No reason. Just wanted to." She took them, arranged them in a vase, set them on the kitchen counter. They were beautiful. She wanted to throw them away. "Thank you," she said. "I know I've been distracted lately. I'm sorry. I want to do better." "Okay. I mean it. You're important to me. This," he gestured between them, "is important to me." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone she both knew and didn't know. The man she'd built a life with. The stranger who called someone else Princess in the Dark. "I know," she said. That night, lying beside him, she finally allowed herself to cry. Silently, careful not to wake him, tears sliding down her temples into her hair. She cried for the relationship they'd had, for the future they wouldn't, for the person she'd been before the bathroom counter, and the glowing phone screen and the word princess had rewired her understanding of everything. She cried because she knew what came next, even if she wasn't ready to face it yet. The confrontation, when it finally came, was quieter than she'd imagined. It was a Saturday afternoon in late January. Weak sunlight filtered through the windows. They were supposed to go to dinner with friends that evening. She'd been getting dressed when she heard his phone buzz repeatedly on the dresser. He was in the kitchen making coffee. She looked at the screen. 5 messages from David. She picked up the phone, walked into the kitchen, set it on the counter between them. "Who's David?" He looked at the phone, at her, back at the phone. Something in his face shifted, like a door closing. "A coworker." "Is David's real name Princess?" The silence that followed was absolute. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. He stood completely still, coffee mug halfway to his mouth, and she watched him decide whether to keep lying. "I can explain," he said finally. "Can you?" It's complicated." "Is it?" She was surprised by how calm her voice sounded, how cold. "Because it seems simple to me. You're sleeping with someone else. You call her the same thing you accidentally called me. You've been lying for months. What's complicated about that?" "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did." "I know. I'm sorry." "How long?" He looked down at his coffee. "Since September. 4 months. 4 months of coming home to her, sleeping beside her, building a lie so complete that she'd almost believed everything was fine." "Do you love her?" "Don't. It's not like that." Do you love her? I don't know, she nodded, picked up his phone, handed it to him. You should probably answer her messages. She seems worried. What are you? I need you to leave, Shizuki, she said. Not forever, just for today. I need you to not be here right now. We should talk about this. There's nothing to talk about yet. I need to think. You need to leave. He stood there for a long moment and she thought he might argue, but he didn't. He set down his coffee, picked up his keys, walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. I really am sorry. I know, she said, but it doesn't change anything. The door closed. She listened to his footsteps on the stairs, listened to the building's front door open and shut, listened to the silence that rushed in to fill the space he'd occupied. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and stopped pretending she was okay. The days after were strange. He stayed at a friend's place, or maybe at her place, she didn't ask. They texted, brief practical exchanges about logistics and belongings and what happened next. He wanted to talk. She wasn't ready, not yet. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, touching objects that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The couch where they'd fallen asleep together. The kitchen counter where he'd accidentally called her princess. The bed they'd shared for 4 years, now too large and too empty. Her friends came over, brought wine, brought food, brought tissues and rage and fierce loyalty. They wanted her to hate him. She couldn't explain that hate required energy she didn't have. She felt hollow instead, scooped out. You should throw out those flowers, her friend Sarah said, eyeing the tulips that were wilting on the counter. I will, but she didn't. She watched them die slowly, petals browning and falling, until the vase held only stems and water gone cloudy. Even then, she couldn't quite bring herself to dump them out. One evening, her mother called. I heard, she said. Are you okay? No. Good, you shouldn't be. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. Or maybe I didn't miss them. Maybe I just didn't want to see. That's not your fault. Isn't it, though? I knew something was wrong. I felt it, and I didn't say anything. You trusted him. There's no shame in that. There should be. After they hung up, she sat in the dark and thought about trust. How it's built slowly, carefully, day by day, and how it can shatter completely in a single moment, leaving nothing but sharp edges and the faint outline of what used to be there. He came back 2 weeks later to get his things. They'd agreed on a time, agreed to be civil. She'd prepared herself, practiced staying calm, but when she opened the door and saw him standing there, familiar and foreign at once, something in her chest cracked open. Hey, he said. Hey. They moved around each other carefully, politely, like strangers who might collide. He packed boxes in the bedroom while she stayed in the kitchen, pretending to organize drawers that didn't need organizing. She listened to the sounds of him dismantling his half of their life. Hangers scraping in the closet, drawers opening and closing, the rustle of clothes being folded. When he was done, he found her in the kitchen. I think that's everything. Okay. I really am sorry. I know I keep saying that, but I am. She looked at him. I need to know something. Anything. Did you ever love me? Really love me? Or was I just comfortable? He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I did love you. I do love you. But somewhere along the way, I stopped showing up. I got lazy. And then I met her and she made me feel... Don't, she said. I don't need to hear about how she made you feel. I need to hear about us. We stopped being us a long time ago. We just didn't want to admit it. She nodded. He was right. She knew he was right. But knowing and accepting are different things. The word princess, she said. When did you start calling her that? I don't remember. Was it before or after you called me that, in the kitchen, that night in October? He closed his eyes. Before. So it was never mine. It was always hers. It was a mistake, saying it to you. I wasn't thinking. No, she said. You were thinking, just not about me. He picked up a box. I should go. Yeah. At the door, he paused. If you ever want to talk, I won't. Okay. After he left, she walked through the apartment, noting the spaces where his things had been. Empty hangers in the closet, a gap on the bookshelf, the absence of his toothbrush on the bathroom counter. The apartment looked the same but felt completely different, like a stage set after the performance has ended. She thought about the night he'd first said it. Princess. How warm it had made her feel, how safe, how loved. She thought about all the times after, when the word had belonged to someone else, had been whispered to someone else, had carried meaning that had nothing to do with her. A name can haunt you, she realized. Not just the names of people, but the words used to hold them. Princess wasn't hers anymore. It probably never had been. It was just borrowed, accidentally given, briefly held. The months that followed were an education in being alone. She learned to cook for one, learned to sleep diagonally across the bed, learned to make decisions without consulting someone else first. She learned that grief wasn't linear, that some days she felt strong and capable, and other days she cried in the produce section of the grocery store because she'd reached for his favorite type of apple before remembering he wouldn't be eating them. She learned that anger came in waves, that some mornings she woke up furious at him, at herself, at the situation. That fury could coexist with missing him, with still loving the version of him she'd thought she knew. She learned that moving on didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the weight differently. Spring arrived, bringing warmth and new green growth. The maples outside her window budded and bloomed. She thought about calling him sometimes, especially late at night when the apartment felt too quiet and the weight of solitude pressed too heavily. But she never did. She heard through mutual friends that he and Princess, she had a real name, Alexandra, but she preferred to think of her as Princess, were still together. That they seemed happy, that they'd moved in together. The news hurt less than she expected. Or maybe she'd just gotten better at feeling pain without flinching. One evening in April, she was at a coffee shop grading papers when she overheard a father with his young daughter at the next table. The little girl, maybe 5 years old, was telling an elaborate story about her day at school. The father listened intently, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts. When she finished, he ruffled her hair and said, "You're brilliant, Princess." The word didn't hurt anymore. It was just a word, a common endearment, a thing people said to small children and loved ones and people they wanted to make feel special. She'd given it too much power, she realized, had let it become more than it was. That night, she wrote him a text message that she never sent. I think I'm finally starting to understand. It wasn't about the word. It was about the moment when something that felt like mine suddenly wasn't. When I realized that the intimacy I thought we shared was just a performance you were giving to someone else too. The word was just proof. Evidence of a reality I'd been trying not to see. I don't hate you. I'm not sure I even miss you anymore, but I miss who we were before everything broke. I miss believing. She deleted it. Some truths don't need to be spoken aloud to be real. Summer came. She started dating again, tentatively, carefully, like someone learning to walk after a long illness. She went out with a teacher from another school, a friend of a friend who made her laugh, a stranger from a dating app who was kind but ultimately wrong. None of them called her Princess. None of them needed to. She was learning that she didn't need someone else's nickname to know her own worth. 1 year after the night in the bathroom, when she'd first seen the message on his phone, she found herself thinking about forgiveness. Not forgiveness for him necessarily, though that might come eventually, but forgiveness for herself, for not seeing sooner, for seeing and choosing not to look, for all the small ways she'd participated in her own heartbreak. She thought about the life they'd built and the life she was building now. They weren't the same. This new life was smaller in some ways, larger in others. It was lonelier. It was also more honest. She thought about Princess, the word, the woman, the ghost that had haunted her for months. She hoped, in a distant way, that they were happy. She hoped he was better for her than he'd been at the end with her. She hoped he'd learned something. She hoped she'd learned something too. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, she sometimes replayed that Tuesday in October. Him at the sink, draining pasta. Her at the counter with basil, the word slipping out like a secret revealed. She'd thought it was a gift. It turned out to be a warning. But she'd survived it. The betrayal, the grief, the slow reconstruction of a self she'd almost lost. She'd survived it and become something different on the other side. Not better, necessarily, not worse. Just different. More careful, more aware, more alone, but also more whole. This is what happens when love decays, she thought. It doesn't explode, it doesn't catch fire, it just quietly empties out, one small betrayal at a time, until you wake up one morning and realize you've been living with a ghost. The peace that came after wasn't relief. It was just the absence of hope, and sometimes she was learning that was enough. She never saw him again. Not in person, anyway. Just in the occasional social media post, in updates from mutual friends, in the fading photographs she eventually moved to a box in the closet. The apartment, once theirs, became fully hers. She painted the bedroom a different color, bought new sheets, rearranged the furniture until the space felt less like something she'd lost and more like something she'd chosen. The word princess stopped being a wound and became just a memory, a reminder of the night everything changed and the months it took her to acknowledge the change. Sometimes, rarely now, she thought about that version of herself, the woman who'd stood in the bathroom holding someone else's phone, reading someone else's love letters, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. That woman felt very far away now, like someone she used to know but didn't particularly like. This woman, the one she'd become, was harder, more guarded, less willing to trust but also less willing to pretend. She knew now that love could be both real and insufficient, that people could hurt you without meaning to, that sometimes the cruelest betrayals were the quiet ones, the accumulations of small deceptions that added up to a life you didn't recognize. She knew that healing wasn't linear, that grief could resurface years later, triggered by a song or a smell or the particular slant of light through a window at dusk. She knew that some questions would never have answers. That closure was a myth people sold themselves to feel better about incomplete endings. But she also knew this. She'd survived. She'd rebuilt. She'd learned to be whole without needing someone else to complete her. And that, in the end, was the only truth that mattered. Years from now, she thought, she'd tell this story differently. She'd remember the love and forget the specific hurt. She'd remember who they'd been together and forgive who they'd become apart. She'd remember the word princess and smile at its absurdity, at the weight she'd given to something so small, but not yet. Right now, the story was still too fresh, too raw. Right now, all she could do was live through each day, one at a time, and trust that eventually the wound would scar and the scar would fade and what remained would just be memory, cleaned of its power to destroy. She thought about writing to him, thought about saying all the things she'd left unsaid that Saturday afternoon when he'd packed his boxes and walked out the door. But what would she say? That she'd loved him? He knew. That he'd hurt her? He knew that too. That she forgave him? She wasn't sure she did. That she wished him well? Maybe, mostly. In the end, she wrote nothing. Some stories don't need epilogues. They just end, quietly and without ceremony, leaving only the people who lived through them and the lessons they carry forward as she learned to say, "I'm okay," and mean it, most days. The apartment grew familiar in new ways. The silence became companionship instead of absence. The single coffee mug on the counter stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like choice. She learned that you can grieve a person who's still alive, that you can love someone and leave them, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that love isn't enough. And late at night, when the world was still and the streetlight filtered through the curtains just right, when memory pressed against the present like a hand against glass, she let herself remember it all, the good and the bad, the before and the after, the moment when Princess stopped being a sweet accident and became the word that changed everything. She let herself remember. And then she let herself sleep. Because this, too, was healing. The ability to hold the past gently, without malice, without drowning in it. The ability to say this happened, and I survived it, and I'm still here. The story didn't have a happy ending, but it had an ending. And sometimes that was enough. She never called anyone princess. The word belonged to someone else now, to a different life, to a version of herself she'd left behind. She didn't need to reclaim it. She just needed to let it go. So she did, retry,